Liberal Currents presents Half the Answer with your hosts, Caitlin M. Green and Trent R. Nelson.
Well, what do they say about the days and how they are and where they are? They're happy, they're here, they're again. Happy days are here again. This is Half the Answer. I'm never going to do it straight, Trent. I'm never going to. And you can't make me. This is Half the Answer, where understanding a question is half the answer. I am Caitlin Green. I'm a linguist, editor, writer with Liberal Currents. And with me is, of course, my lovely co-host, Trent Nelson, philosopher, historian, excellent glasses wearer. I feel like I focus on the hat, but I think your glasses are so stylish and I love them. How are you, Trent?
Thank you. I'm doing really well. Got the glasses at an antique store. That should tell you something about me. Well, Caitlin, we've had such wonderful chats so far, and recently we've been dealing with a lot of heavy stuff. Of course, there's AI trying to take over the world. There's eugenics. There's a lot of stuff. There's the Epstein.
There's AI CEOs doing eugenics.
There's AI CEOs doing eugenics. Thank you, Wall Street Journal. That. But, well, with all of the hubbub going on constantly, well, we can't forget about our neighbors. And one of our international neighbors, that's China. And you've heard the president talk about China. He says it in an awfully funny way. And, well,
I suppressed the urge to do it just now, and I want credit.
You get all the credit that you need. You get all the credit that you need. Well,
I've been told my Trump impression is upsetting.
Well, I think we're all upset having to listen to him in general. But you know who could be upset with you? Well, we're talking Trump, we're talking China, we're talking the United States. How do all these things work together? Well, sometimes better than others. To do that, to discuss China and Trump and America and how these things all fit together, well, we've got somebody very special. You know him as Beijing Palmer. We know him as James Palmer, and he is deputy editor over with Foreign Policy. Wonderful publication, doing marvelous work each and every day. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Well, I mean, for somebody living in an occupied city of Washington, D.C., pretty well. I also live right at the point where highly gentrified upper class neighborhoods meet black neighborhoods, which is the point at which a lot of the police patrolling has been done, because a lot of it is about, little shits of Doge guys feeling offended by seeing black people having a good time on a Friday night.
Yeah.
It's so it's been an interesting couple of days.
Some of the videos that we have seen trickling out of DC, they get you really, really frustrated if you can get past laughing, because a lot of people are taking videos showing how ridiculous this occupation is as it concerns what they're actually trying to police, people having a drink or a smoke on their front porch. I don't
Trying
know where
to drive on a road near their house.
Right.
Yeah.
Almost
but
like
the consequences are pretty serious. We've had a couple arrests, right?
Yeah, we've had okay, you probably always going to get arrested for throwing a sandwich at the FBI.
But you're also going to be a hero.
That's why they call it a hero. It was it's a very interesting name. But this, we've seen this before in China, and we've seen that interaction between what do the police do, who supplements the police, what does police presence mean, and what do people expect if they get into a confrontation with the police. And now in America, there's a expectation, particularly if you are white, and particularly if you're more middle to upper class, that you can confront the police, yell at them, protest them, hold up signs against their presence, and the consequences for you will not be devastating. In China, that's very much not the case. People do confront law enforcement authorities, but only when they feel that they're backed up by some kind of superior moral authority or street presence that will allow them to to elude the kind of like long term, to evade the long term consequence, because they'll be part of a crowd. People
Right.
won't generally act individually unless they're exceptionally angry or afraid or whatever. So when China deploys police, when China puts people out en masse, the stilling effect on speech is very immediate. People, if you stick, like a guy on every street corner in Beijing, people's behavior immediately changes. That's much less the case in the United States, both because the proportions are much smaller. I mean, you look at this surge of attempt to occupy DC, and it's about I think it told us about 1,500 extra people between National Guard, the diverted federal law enforcement, and so on. Rather than in China, you can be looking at like thousands of people sent to just one neighborhood. But also, when people see this presence here, they are not, for the most part, reacting right now with terror or fear of consequences. They're acting up. They're pushing back, they're fighting back, and that's an encouraging sign in terms of the healthiness of a democracy. The question is, can that mentality sustain itself if the situation gets worse, and if we start to see people's lives being destroyed simply for the act of speech?
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really important point that you brought up, sir, is that Americans of a certain ethnic background and a certain economic background, perhaps they don't feel as others in the country have historically felt, that they might be negatively confronted after confronting a police officer. Like they might have to deal with some type of repercussion for expressing themselves. And I mean, as you saw in the video of the hero thrower, he chucked that thing and then started boogieing. And it was a whole Benny Hill scene. And, everyone laughs and giggles, but these folks are not here to play. They are here to cause some trouble in the guise of stopping trouble, and so that certainly is nefarious. And well, you are a second person we've spoken to in DC just this week, and neither
Yeah, we
has
used to
had.
be in danger of becoming the Texas podcast. Now we're the DC podcast. We're moving around.
There are worse things. Um, so, sir, we'll keep this in our back pocket, and obviously we'll come back to it. But I think we had you down to talk about, talk about maybe foreign policy and how our domestic policy unravels what we would like from a foreign standpoint sometimes. Well, sir,
Alas, my great weakness.
you,
Anything that didn't happen in America.
sir, you may have heard that that the president likes tariffs. Um,
It's come up.
okay, well, in our guest work, it has come up. Well, sir, the tariffs, they seem to be a problem, but the biggest problem for the president seems to be that he's keeps putting deadlines on them, and that nobody wants to play nicely with him in the run up to that. As it concerns China, a 90-day pause was just put on to tariffs that were supposed to go into effect just the other day.
Is this the second 90-day pause? Like,
This is the second 90-day pause. The
Yeah.
first 90-day pause was after they had the brief kind of intense, 140, 190% like tit for tat tariffs.
Right.
Then everybody had a lovely weekend in Switzerland together. I'm not even kidding.
It's true.
It does,
I've seen
it
the
does actually
pictures.
seem like, and they said, it was really nice to sit outdoors, and it does genuinely seem that having a pleasant break really
your
helped
mindset
with
really
the
can
economy.
change. After a little time outside, get the sun on your face, feel a little breeze, and then suddenly you're a whole new guy.
You just put Donald Trump and Xi Jinping together in on some kind of pleasant, mountain walk, and watch geopolitical tensions melt away. I mean, it really helped in this case that neither leader was present, and instead what you had was this layer that's survived personalist and destructive policies in both countries, which is a layer of sort of technical competence and diplomatic experience. Now that layer is being eroded very, very fast in the United States, and something like the Switzerland meeting might actually be the high point of American diplomacy for the next few years. You compare it with like Steve Witkoff in Moscow, where the essentially sending one guy who knows nothing has been a disaster of mistranslation, or the lack of anybody around Donald Trump to tell him that Dmitry Medvedev is a irrelevant drunk and not in fact a shaper of Russian foreign policy, which instead he sees, Dmitry tweeting from a vodka bottle at 3 a.m, causes us to change our nuclear submarine positioning.
Right.
But
yeah, because where is Trump getting all of his feelings and ideas? It's social media, like your uncle.
Yeah, it is. Trump, as well as being a genuinely horrible person in many long-standing ways, is also, like much of the American elite, succumbed to posters madness.
Right.
And the belief that their interactions online are the most important ones, and that these interactions reflect the true state of the world.
Right.
there's
Well,
a-
I was just going to say this sounds very much like in an episode of Neoliberalism. At the very beginning, they spoke about the South Korean president, right, and how he had been brainwormed by being online so much, being turned from like a normie conservative politician into this like absolutely like far right hold like conspiracy theorist.
fully cooked brain, like
Right.
just absolutely baked himself in, like the belief that the South Korean left was operating on behalf of Pyongyang, that communists lurked behind every corner. I mean, basically think a 1950s John Birch guy
Right.
plus the internet. And now we're lucky that the Chinese leadership is not very online. But coming back to the tariffs, what the Chinese leadership does understand is power, because they come from a system in which power confrontation inside the CCP is often quite sharp and direct, and the question of who can fuck over who is a very immediate and unmediated one. And that's, I think, partially why their tariff response has been so much more successful than the majority of countries. The majority of countries went into a state of basically appeasement or evasion.
Right.
We can talk our way around this effectively. Oh, Trump doesn't really want this; he wants X, and if we give him a little bit of X, he'll give us Y. And now, it turns out that when you give a bully what he wants, he goes away and never troubles you again. That's
Yeah, that's
the
what they
lesson
tell
of
you.
life. China, in sharp contrast, pretty much immediately went into fuck you mode, and fuck you mode has been much more successful because it caused the president to end up backing down. It's caused this extension of the 90-day pause, and I suspect that what we'll get is basically like every 3 months we're going to get another extension of the 90-day pause, allowing some kind of saving of face on Trump's back. I say saving of face. You may not be familiar with the idea that Americans are proud and traditional people who dislike public humiliation, and so engage in a series of complex social rituals to ameliorate this.
And
so
this is, of course, uniquely American.
it's that's hence why the term saving face is in English. What else?
Yeah, there you go. As a linguist, I co-sign all of this. This is exactly right. Yeah.
So the so when you look at the Chinese response, it wasn't just that they went tit for tat on the tariffs themselves. It was that they grabbed America's balls and squeezed on rare earths, and rare earths are not particularly rare, but the processing of them is almost entirely a Chinese monopoly at the moment. And
Really?
oh yeah, like
bismuth and stuff that we need for our
or
phones.
a whole range of stuff, lithium, etc. And it's not that sourcing it is that hard. It's that over time the processing almost entirely disappeared from the West and went to China because it was cheaper and because they built up a whole kind of supportive infrastructure.
Right.
And so, in the event that China cut off all these supplies, you would have like anywhere between 3 months and a year of like panicked scrambling in the West. But you could replace these chains, but replacing these chains would take concerted government industrial effort of a type that we've become increasingly bad at, and that
Right.
is even less likely to be effective in any way under Donald Trump. So American American industry, including the defense industry, pretty much just started screaming as soon as the Chinese started squeezing on rare earths, and that caused the Americans to back off. And the Chinese have been like keeping their hand there and, cupping the balls. Just every so often reminding America of its position.
Right.
Now, in theory, so a lot of American Chinese stuff is a question of mutual dependence, where
Right.
the party who holds the power wants to remind the other side that they have that power, but not do it in such a way that it pushes the other side to take the steps that would cause that power to be given up. So
Right.
in the Chinese side, theoretically, if they fucked around enough on rare earths, we could actually get our act together and, reopen sites that have been closed since the 1970s, call on global expertise to try and come in to help with this. We could do, it would be a near wartime level of effort in terms of organization. It would be like moving the Soviet factories from Ukraine to Siberia in World War II, sort of level of stress. But it would be doable, and it would end this dependency. It's much less doable, as I said, under Donald Trump. So there's a degree where the Chinese understand that they can push more without pushing us all the way over into actually getting our act together. And the converse side, we try to squeeze China on chips because they need enormous amounts of compute power at the moment for AI development, but also just general technological business needs. If we push too hard and refuse them any kind of chip, then the Chinese chip industry becomes much more motivated to do a huge push on the domestic chip industry, and maybe get themselves to a state where they can seriously compete with us, rather than the state of the art at the moment, which is like being perennially 2 years behind, which is a long time in computing terms.
Right.
So these are the tensions of like two superpowers, both of which have power, but one side is much more at this point experienced and canny about using it in international terms. Trump's problem is he's a domestic bully. He's not really that good at being an international one, especially when it comes to anybody who can stand up against him.
He feels like he is.
Yeah,
he likes to talk like he is.
He likes to talk like he is, but you notice his language towards actual powers like China and Russia, and Russia isn't even that. I mean, Russia is like if in superpower terms, Russia is like the guy with a really crappy, the Aquaman of superpowers. Theoretically, it's very powerful in its one domain, but nobody really takes it seriously.
Solomon Grundy, sir. There's Solomon Grundy. All right.
It's it's true. It's a large zombie that's sort of lurching about the place, trying to smash things. But Trump's language towards China and Russia is always much more obsequious, much more kind of like Xi Jinping is a very strong man, and I admire him, than it is towards smaller countries. And this is a mentality that you see to a degree with the Chinese themselves. They will show a degree of respect, is perhaps the wrong word, but they will talk to America as if America was an actual problem. They talk to smaller countries as if they should be licking China's feet.
Well, that's not too uncommon across the diplomatic spectrum. We often project how we feel onto others, of course, and that's no different with nations. So, of course, with all of this education, we appreciate the education on how China thinks and how they deal with problems like ours. Well, can you explain to us, sir, um, how while this dance is going on, as it concerns tariffs between the United States and China, why are many pundits saying that um, international tariffs in general are a boon to China? What does this have to do with sort of America walking back its influence throughout the world?
So anything that, in theory, anything that closes off American power is a gift to China. And tariffs close off American power. They make America less attractive in both simple commercial terms and in soft power terms. The more barriers you throw up to dealing with the country, the less people generally want to deal with it. Now, America has a lot of goodwill to burn through here. America has a big store of commercial and soft power. All those 30 years of everybody in the world watching Friends isn't going to disappear overnight.
Could we be any more influential?
Quite genuinely, I think the image of urban life in your 20s as a kind of paradise of independence and freedom depicted in Friends has been the most successful American soft power export of the last half century. Chinese also love the Big Bang
They need
Theory,
to know that's not achievable. Nobody in that show could afford the apartments they had in that show.
It's I don't want to confess quite how deep my level of Friends lore goes, but there are in fact explanations given within the show for how they afford the apartments.
Oh my gosh. Because I'm sure they were getting that criticism at the time where people were like, are you kidding me right now? And they're like, no, Chandler, he works at a really high power place.
Also,
Rachel's dad is rich.
Bear in mind, this is 1990s New York, so it's marginally less insane than 2020's New York. But technically, this is a level of expertise I was not expecting to have to bring to the conversation.
Let's go.
But, Rachel and Monica are legally subletting the apartment from Monica's grandmother, who has it as a long-term rent-controlled apartment. So they're paying
That's right.
a 1960s rate for a 1990s apartment.
Don't tell Andrew Cuomo.
Andrew Cuomo, well-known real New York resident.
He's really concerned about low-income residents being able to.
Did you see the thing where he went to his supposed apartment in New York, and it was very obviously his daughter's, and his daughter's really into woo, just crystals and new age shit. So Andrew Cuomo is just
these are my various crystals.
This is my dream catcher, which honors my Italian ancestors. It's it's amazing. I strongly recommend it. Like when Eric Adams, of course, did the same with his here I am, well-known vegan. This meat is in my is in my fridge for study purposes. He just
remind me how evil it is.
I keep the bed right in the middle.
Yeah, just going around the apartment, clearly very surprised by opening every door. Just and this is the bathroom.
My favorite room in the house. Hang on.
There's a lot of accumulated power that America can burn through here, but in theory, China can step in and kind of take these markets, take these opportunities. The thing is, China is, for the last few years, has been increasingly dickish itself in its relationships with the world, and has been throwing up a bunch of its own political, diplomatic, commercial barriers in many cases. Now, it's also tried to just massively push goods out into the world. There's been huge overproduction, and that gets to this point where this is a very ambivalent relationship for a lot of countries, because on the one hand, you're getting a lot of cheap Chinese goods, which is good. On the other hand, cheap Chinese goods are flooding your market and destroying the possibility for local producers, which is bad.
Right.
And so the Chinese are aware that there's an opportunity here. They are aware that that Trump is kind of giving them this space, like handing over the potential for leadership. But it's not. There's so many domestic political considerations that they end up putting first that they're not really able to fully take advantage of this. And one term that's been really interesting to me that's been cropping up in Chinese official speech a lot of late is Nejuan. Now, this rather confusingly translates as involution, as in the opposite of evolution. And it's a term that came from sociology with a very technical meaning originally, but it entered into Chinese as a kind of equivalent originally in about 2020, 2021 of like the Japanese, hikomori, like shut-ins, like when you close yourself off, from the world. And it's now being picked up by the government and used to mean businesses and provincial governments turning inwards, which is a bad thing, which they're portraying as a bad thing. Like you're not reforming and opening up, as the traditional Chinese phrase goes. You're like closing in and becoming obsessed with only these like very petty local needs. And they, this is a term that's being repeated across like high level government language. What they can't do is acknowledge that this tendency is a result of the previous high level government language, that all these local governments, all these businesses ended up kind of shriveling in on themselves because the Chinese leadership created such an atmosphere of paranoia, worry, domestic obsession from the top. But it does mean that they acknowledge that there's a problem and that they need to resolve this problem before they can take advantage of the gap being opened up by like Trumpian intransigence with the rest of the world.
Well, sir, again, when we learn about China, it feels as though we sort of are actually getting a little bit of a psychology lesson regarding the president. Why is the president also trying to make all of these American institutions and businesses sort of turn in as well on each other? Why aren't we good at learning things observationally, sir? Can you explain that one to us? Like, why don't we look at the thing and say, well, we should maybe take something from that?
Well, this idea of studying and learning from the world is a very dangerously liberal one, and clearly shows that you've been corrupted by the idea of reason and thought, rather than, and possibly using numbers that are very bad numbers. We hate these numbers. They're awful numbers. We don't like them. We're going to get you better numbers. But there's I would say that in general, America has been extremely bad at learning from China, from experiences in China at all, and that the American view of China across the board is often wildly out of date, because this is a case I've been making for a long time. Americans just use China as a rhetorical stick to hit each other with. It's always like my particular thing that I was worried about anyway is happening in China, or the Chinese are going to get ahead of us. Like classic example was the social credit system. Now, the social credit system, which I don't know if you probably remember from the kind of period where it's like every Chinese citizen is assigned a number, and
Yes.
it's like Black Mirror, and if they breathe in the wrong way, or if one of them accidentally posts an image of Winnie the Pooh, his social credit system score falls and he is ostracized and cast out into the countryside. And none of this was true. Like social credit was mostly just like a Western credit score when they were trying to establish a credit system in a country where all this lending and so on was quite new. And then it mixed with various other bits of like existing Chinese surveillance control monitoring systems that are concerning. But it was a reflection of like what we were panicked about in the West. We were panicked about the idea of the surveillance state. We were panicked about the idea that our lives could be monitored and tracked and so on. And so that and the fact that we do not in any meaningful way actually look at Chinese experience became very obvious to me in the early days of the pandemic. Now, I'm not an epidemiologist. I know nothing about infectious diseases beyond reading some books about plague and this kind of thing. But I was able to make pretty good predictions at the start of the pandemic just from the fact that I was looking at what Chinese scientists were saying and taking what Chinese scientists were saying seriously, and looking at how the government was behaving and taking how the government behaved seriously, and not projecting my own existing ideas onto what it looked like. So it was very obvious, like the Chinese were saying, for instance, from at least early February, that this was a respiratory, like airborne disease, and it took, months for that to be fully acknowledged in the West. And again, this is just stuff that if we'd taken the Chinese seriously as scientists and as people, we could have picked up on much more easily. And so instead, and especially with somebody like Trump. Now, Trump in general, look, his brain is glitching. We all know this. Like it's, but in general, he exemplifies that boomer tendency to judge the world based on your memories of 40 years ago.
Right.
I say boomer, but this is more a function of the fact that this is the age that the boomers are now. This isn't like some inherent boomer quality. Gen X is becoming just as bad.
They're gonna do the same.
Millennials
Yeah.
millennials will do the same. Like.
Don't you dare say that. We're different.
Millennials are just going to be bouncing around with like false, because also everybody like thinks that they were born like a generation before they were. So millennials are just going to be bouncing around believing that they were adults in the 1980s. It's they're going to be like, we didn't have any of these phones and computers in our day.
No, I got my first phone at 12 years old.
There you go.
I have no illusions about what generation I'm in.
Well, you don't now, Caitlin. Give it another 30 or 40 years.
Right. I drank out of the hose, and I don't know. I had a key on my necklace or whatever.
It's we're all going to think we were the kids in Stranger Things. I remember when I was a kid and I stumbled on those secret government experiments. It's gonna happen.
Remember when we went to the Upside Down? Real freaky.
So
kids today don't even know.
So with Trump, his view of China is baked in this weird like 1980s mentality where it's simultaneously always behind us because it's a backwards Asian country, but also like, oh well, they have skyscrapers now. This is so overwhelming and impressive, and you see this kind of vacillation between these two. American policy as a whole has not caught up to where China is in manufacturing, which is that they're extremely sophisticated, like large power, which combines both cheap manufacturing and like massively high end, like beyond our capabilities, levels of coordination. I say beyond our capabilities because we haven't built up these structures. This isn't like an insurmountable technical barrier. This is what happens when you spent 20 years making widgets, is that you get real good at making widgets. And this was another thing that the tariffs brought up, like all these like little sub-industries just going into complete panic because it's not just that China makes all of their widgets, it's that nobody else outside of China now knows how to make these widgets. I'm a giant board game nerd, and board games in particular were in a state of complete shock because nobody outside China knows how to do dice properly anymore, or how to like cut cards. There are a couple.
Not even the Germans.
Not even the Germans. No,
aren't they the board game?
They are the Germans, but the German board game stuff is all made in China nowadays.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the theoretical side, the design elements are American and German and French and so on, but the actual physical components are almost entirely made in China. So there's all these areas in which like you can get these kind of cocky American actions, and then the repercussions only become apparent when people in specific industries or sub-industries are like, actually, we're really dependent on China for this, and we're screwed if we don't like bend. And I don't see any way that pattern doesn't continue pretty much indefinitely under Donald Trump, because I think given that we spent the last 10 years talking about how we needed to rebuild all these things and didn't, I think the chances of any of them happening under the most corrupt and incompetent administration in American history are quite low.
It could happen. Okay, so basically you're saying like he's gonna announce a big move. Some representatives of the industries affected will say, "Hi, that affects us very badly," and then he'll have to
And then
walk it back
there'll be
or
another
delay it.
90-day
Yeah,
pause or
delays.
whatever, there's a lot of potential for screwing over the world, particularly screwing over the world in ways that make Donald Trump money or the people around Donald Trump money. But on China in particular, and I think the power dynamic is such that we are not going to go fully over the edge. Now, again, brains melting,
Yes.
mad people around him.
Always
Also,
have to account for the melted brains.
always have to account for the melted brain. There's lots of stuff that could go disastrously wrong, like basically through incredibly unimportant shit that becomes extremely important shit. Some Chinese student gets killed by an American racist, and it becomes a thing in Beijing, and then Donald Trump responds to like social media posts in China, believing that the Chinese government. Lots of stuff. Lots of ways you can imagine that stuff would go wrong, but assuming
there's like an absurd amount of conspiracism and anti-Chinese hate in America, right? Like there's like the Alex Jones like Chi-Com ranting and the idea that like they're always doing these hoaxes and controlling and doing ops and stuff.
Although weirdly, I think it's actually died down because the American conspiratorial imagination is so directed against America at this point. There's much less need for Americans to go searching for foreign villains because they imagine that we have
such a good enemy from within now.
Exactly. And China doesn't really, you had this effort to try and do the, China is behind BLM, and the problem is that the Chinese government is so reactionary itself that trying to associate it with American progressive forces is really, you've got to be like really old school, kind of like anti-communist, and also the communists created the civil rights movement, to go there. Now there are
to weaken and degenerate our population.
You do have some figures who are Chinese dissidents from the 1980s who have cooked their brains fully in American right-wing and evangelical propaganda, who do that, but it's a very weak stream compared to the American conspiratorial mainstream that is focused on the real threat to America.
Right. And the Jewish people. That's more attractive.
It's all it's like carcinization. All conspiracy theories eventually turn into anti-Semitism.
That's right. There's an anti-Semitic line of no return that you always hit.
Yeah, exactly.
So, sir, the painting that you have given us, well, it seems as though there's just a lot of dancing going on, right? The president sets tariffs into motion, maybe put a little pressure on the Chinese. The Chinese say, well, wait a minute, we know how to do all the stuff that you guys don't do anymore. And we see a pullback of sorts. But then on the other hand, as you noted, these tariffs internationally sort of open the door for another power to come in and perform and act as the Americans have over several decades, dating back to the Second World War, post-generation. But they don't want it either, because, as you said, they are turning in just as we are sort of also turning in. So what does that leave us with? A sort of empty dance floor?
Yeah, and a much poorer world. I think this is one of the things that, at least for the next few years, we can really see I think we're going to see a reversal in the general trend over the last 30, 40 years, which has been global prosperity. And people forget this because, again, they idealize like the America of 2 generations ago and think that was the norm. But the world got way richer and from 1980 onwards, and I think we're going to see like just a steadily poorer world at least in the short term. I think in the long term, stuff might pick up, but it's not just so. If thinking in terms of like America as a buyer, for instance, like China just cannot replace America as a buyer. The Chinese
Right.
public is not rich enough to buy the sheer amount of like shit from overseas that America currently does. And so let's say that a percentage of that falls off from the American market. The Chinese market isn't capable of replacing it. Isn't capable of like becoming becoming that new market, and most of the world is already kind of overstuffed with stuff anyway.
Would you say that one of our greatest superpowers is our consumption ability?
Yeah, I mean the fact that the American public is very rich and really loves buying stuff has been a huge, like source of power to America. And it's that because Donald Trump is very stupid, he hates that and thinks it's a bad thing, but Americans buying shit from overseas has been tremendously useful.
Right. Well, it appears to me, and it long has, that while that is a superpower, so much of our soft power is just is not understood by certain segments of the conservative population. They don't understand how our consumption is a power. They don't understand how our I won't call it altruism because we don't have any, but no nation does. But the sort
I
of
just tried to yell at you, but I was muted. That's very dark. Okay, we have altruism.
no,
We are people.
right, but we at one point were doing things not only because the things were right, but because there was a financial gain in doing so. And now it seems as though, as it regards programs like USAID and various others, that we are sort of blocking out the fact that we benefit from doing these things. So again, I will sort of state it differently. We'll have a poor world coming up, according to James Palmer. But will this carry on post Trump presidency? Well, is this something that we can expect to sort of collapse afterwards, or are we on a new path?
I like to think that the basic desire of people to make money will help us in the long term. Like you can in fact make more money by dealing with the rest of the world than by closing yourself off. And
Right.
oh, it's possible to forestall that for a long time. It's possible for countries to close themselves off for the most stupid of domestic reasons, but ultimately, that beautiful and benevolent force of greed does tend to win out in the long run.
The loving and tender invisible hand of the market.
Exactly,
Us.
our beautiful savior, global capitalism. I think this is one of the perennial points of disagreement I have with Marxists, at least modern American Marxists, is that they don't have the great admiration and love that Marx did for capitalism. Like if you read Marx on capitalism, he's a big fanboy. Like he just thinks capitalism is really neat, and it's
It was when I read it, I was like, this is way more descriptive than I expected, right? Because it's just like, here's the system.
The bourgeois, the most powerful force in human history. They're awesome, and also kind of bad, but awesome.
They are hurting people.
So, I have some optimism in the midterm. I have very little optimism in the short term.
Okay, well, long term is good.
I do think that the millennials will be able to survive to eventually become prosperous and senile 70-year-olds, as we discussed.
And become horrible, yeah.
Yeah, and have their politics get worse. But
yeah, I look forward to making my children's eyes roll.
Exactly. It's at some point all of us will become Grandpa Simpson.
Yeah, it'll happen to you.
The kids don't know who Grandpa Simpson is, though. Like that's a reference only. Like
get them.
It's
they need to be educated.
They're out there with their AIs and their TikToks and their Instagrams, not watching The Simpsons.
Right. No, they know who he is because of the memes. So he lives on.
Why do you think I have an onion tied to my belt?
I know who Principal Skinner is. Yeah, there's like a whole cult around steamed hams. Like I think we're good.
It's, yeah, this is going to be like Confucian sayings in like Chinese culture. You know, nobody will actually read the original, but they'll be
Right.
embedded into the.
They'll be running
embedded
around
into
being
the
like, "Am
culture.
I out of touch?" No, it's
No,
the children who are wrong.
It's great to be here. Great to talk to you. Hope we can do this again at some point.
Absolutely.
I would love that so much. It's been great speaking to you. Thank you for being here.
Real pleasure.
Well, on that note, this has been Half the Answer, the show where there's an answer, but you can get half of it by asking a question. And we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Half the Answer, presented by Liberal Currents. You can find Half the Answer anywhere you get your podcasts. Liberal Currents is an entirely listener and subscriber-funded publication, which includes programs like Half the Answer and Neon Liberalism. So, if you like what you've heard and wish to contribute, you may do so at liberalcurrents.com and through Patreon. And remember, understanding a question is half the answer.